Hi, my name is Yajaira Barraza, and my research advisor for my McNair project is Dr. Richard Pitts in the psychology department. Our research is a quantitative study of reactions to disabled individuals. As a person who identifies as a disabled individual living with cerebral palsy or CP for short since I was 2, I've come across people that don't really know how to react to me or are simply surprised I'm able to do so much with only one hand. According to CDC, 1 in 4 adults, 68 million Americans live with a disability, and that is why it's so important to understand how people perceive disability and how this perception may affect disabled people in their everyday life. For example, in 2015, researchers conducted a study where they asked non-disabled individuals their opinion about disabled people that use technology to enhance their physical abilities, such as exoskeletons and prosthetics. The researchers found that non-disabled individuals believe that disabled people that use technology to enhance their physical abilities were better off than disabled people that didn't use technology in any form. But in comparison to people who didn't have a disability, disabled people who didn't use technology in any form was still considered less than. Another prime example is a study conducted in 2015, which looked at the perception non-disabled individuals have when they view Paralympic sports event. The study suggests that individuals, spectators, event organizers, still focus on the inspirational aspect of the event rather than the ability of the individual in the event. Based on this, I want to ask the question: when you see this picture, what do you see? Words like disability, health, achievement, and overachieving may be used, but also inspiration. Similar words can be used to explain this picture. However, as opposed to the first disabled person, we see a girl playing in the park, like any child her age. However, her actions can be labeled as an inspiration for others simply because, despite her disability and despite how mundane or normal this action may look like, she's able to climb the obstacle with prosthetic legs. This emotional reaction can be called inspiration porn. Inspiration porn was coined by Stella Young in 2014. Stella Young was a disability advocate, and in her TED Talk in 2014, she stated, "I want to live in a world where we don't have such low expectations of disabled people, that we are congratulated for getting out of bed and remembering our names in the morning. I want to live in a world where we value genuine achievement for disabled people." In essence, inspiration porn explains that the idea that non-disabled people view disabled people as an inspiration, regardless of how mundane or normal the task may be, such as brushing their teeth or learning to drive while being disabled, or perhaps just getting up in the morning. There were 2 studies done in inspiration porn within a disability framework. The first one was conducted in 2018. Researchers used images of athletes with and without a prosthetic leg doing a physical activity with a challenge, climbing a mountain, or without a challenge, standing up. The standing up part was a mundane task. Study 2 was conducted in 2015. It was called We're the Superhumans, and the aim of the study was to understand inspiration from a mundane task, so the researchers compared riding without hands and buying groceries with a wheelchair to an exceptional task such as playing an instrument without hands. Given the limited amount of studies on inspiration porn, my research study will contribute to the literature by being the first study about inspiration porn with an experimental design. My research question is, does watching a disabled individual do a task invoke inspiration or an emotional response? I hypothesized that in comparison to the participants in the non-disabled individual group, the participants in the disabled individual group will report higher levels of inspiration and affect responses. So my survey received IRB approval. I used a platform called Quantitive to conduct my study. And prior to answering the survey questions, I had the participants watch two clips, a non-disabled driver and versus a disabled driver. So there were 68 participants that were recruited through an online randomized database at WSU. And of those 68 participants, only 34 participants were randomly assigned to the disability video clip and 32 to the non-disability video clip. As you can see here, the first one looks at the non-disabled person driving, and the second one, her name is Madison, and she was born without her left arm, and she both explain how they learned to drive with one hand. But as opposed to the first video clip, she also explains how she overcame her many obstacles to learn to drive and how long it took her to learn to drive. My experiment was in between subject design, and after watching the video clips, participants were asked to complete several questions concerning inspiration in a different effect responses. These two were my scales. The first one was Ellie and Drush, which measured inspiration scale, which was made in 2004. However, the questions I used came from a modified version of the scale. And the questions were scored at a 7-point scale. All 4 questions on the inspiration scale were summed up to create a total score, with higher scores indicating higher levels of reported inspiration. The second scale I used was the effect response, which measured positive, negative, mixed, and meaningful effect, which was also reconstructed by researchers in 2012. Participants were presented a list of 15 effect terms and asked to rate how the video made them feel. This is just an example as to what their participants saw in the survey. I did 5 independent sympathy tests, and all 5 reported significantly higher levels of inspiration and effect responses in the disability video group than the non-disability video group. My hypothesis was supported. Significant difference between the two groups were found in all dependent variables. And surprisingly, participants that watched the disabled video clip reported slightly higher levels of effect responses. And lastly, although the results of the disability video group were statistically significant, both groups reported overall low-level negative effect. Because I had 68 participants, my sample size was small, and because Madison, the woman that was driving, was disabled, there was an apparent built-in inspiration context, so that means that there were other outside factors that might have influenced the participants, such as her tone of voice and the fact that she shared about 5 minutes of how she overcame her disability and how she learned to drive with assistance. And also, because this was the survey, social desirability has to be taken into account. For future studies, a future study should consider comparing more than 2 variables. I only had 2, and future research should prioritize finding and creating disability video clips that provide a more neutral aesthetic that could lead to a more controlled study. These were my sources. Now we'll take some questions. Thank you. My biggest challenge was finding enough information and studies about inspiration porn. Like I said, inspiration porn is a novice term, so there isn't much out there. And also my literature review, I had to look at extensively such studies, and I only found only a few. So I think my study was on perception of inspiration, so I think this could be like a reminder to be aware of how you perceive a disabled person, how you act and behave around them, and understand that that person's more than the disability itself. And so in practice, I think people in general might be aware that there is more to one than a person than the disability, that they're capable of doing so much more than their physical limitations or emotional limitations. Um, I think what I would like to say is that I would like to see more studies conducted on disability and inspiration overall. Again, inspiration porn is just a term that maybe more people might know, but they don't know the title of it. And so I think just having more information about this inspiration porn is what I would say.